Wait for it, and we're live. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just a couple of nerdy veterans, a stabby chaos coordinator, and one chief shenanigator geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. At least I do. So without further ado, we're going to let our guests introduce themselves to our listeners and viewers at home, starting with Mr. Ben of BK Gibson fame.
Hey there. Yep. As JR said, I am Ben Gibson. I am half of BK Gibson, a co-writing couple. Karen and I were on here a few weeks ago from you guys. Yeah, I'm a writer. I also write RPG material, been publishing RPG material for like 10 years. So I've been doing RPG stuff, which always has ancient stuff. And of course, our novel has ancient Greek inspirations. So that's why I was excited to get on this one.
Absolutely. And we got some letters about you. We told you in the pre-show, people thought you liked each other too much. I know, it's shocking. Married couples that like each other. What is wrong with you?
That's like I said, we have 3 kids, you know. A surprise the first time, but after that.
All right. Next we have Mr. Jacob Sharp. You are muted, sir.
Spacebar wasn't working. Yeah, so my name is Jacob Sharp. I'm an Army veteran. I was an infantryman for 6 years. I've done some law enforcement stuff. I have a quasi-relevant sort of degree, so I do have a minor in history, so it's not something I'm totally unfamiliar with. And then I've written several short stories, some novellas with Defiant House, with the E4 Mafia, Tales of the E4 Mafia 2, Ragntor Press. I've also got a novella through one of the Canon High Caliber compilations. And then as of February, I've got my historical fiction boys adventure book, Boy Against the Boxers, with Raconteur as well.
Oh, cool.
All right. Next, we have Miss Jenna S. Brown, who sometimes cosplays as Jenna Ray, introducing herself for the 1000th time.
The 1000th at least. Hi guys, I'm Jenna S. Brown. I'm the chief shenanigator around here. That's kind of partway between den mother and cat herder, and mostly I spend my time harassing JR because I can't get in trouble for it. Because I know his mom, so it's one of those things. And I also write under the pen name Jenna Ray. That's where all the urban fantasy, science fiction, and other such things go. And I'm excited. We're going to have a good talk today.
All right, we are excited to have you here as usual. Next, we have the one, the only.
Can't get rid of me at this point.
Yeah, we're stuck with you. The one, the only, the outlaw author himself, Mr. Jesse James Fain.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jesse James Fain. I do go by the outlaw author because the branding writes itself. I write sword fights, fist fights, gun fights, anything that I can squeeze some kind of fight into. And I do really love doing that while mixing ancient cultures in. A lot of my characters are based off of Native American or Scandinavian cultures from the past.
All right, and that is an awesome thing. And finally, last but certainly not least, we have Miss Melissa McShane, War Hamster, War Master, and the War Mistress herself.
Hi, I'm Melissa McShane. I'm the author of many fantasy novels of different kinds, including the lit RPG series War Master and the historical fantasy series The Extraordinaries, which is my one foray into writing about ancient cultures. And I am happy to be here.
We are happy you are here. So with that out of the way, before we get too deep into this discussion where we're going to do the religion questions and then we're going to do our commercial, which is on point today, let's first say that because we do have the religion question, we did gear it towards the topic. And I'm going to say, what one ancient culture, myth, or historical element do you love seeing reimagined in sci-fi or fantasy books, movies, or games? And why does it hook you? Ben, since you've already written one of those, I'm going to let you go first.
So it's got to be. I've been on a Greek kick lately. I love anytime like ancient Greece. The police. It can be classical Greece. It can be Macedonian era. It can be anything in those. I love seeing that. I love seeing the city states. I love seeing the spears on shields. I just love that stuff.
Okay, and what about you, Jacob?
Yeah, so I'll cheat a little bit. I've got two that I'm not sure which one I prefer to see more. I think one is probably more underexplored than the other, but I really enjoy seeing crusader-esque military religious orders in fantasy and fiction. I think a great example of that in a popular series would be like the Wheel of Time with the White Cloaks. You know, having this sort of like uh, uh, military order that's also following some deeply rooted religious belief, whether they end up being the villain or the hero of the story. I think that's always interesting to see how authors do that and implement it. I think the my what is arguably my most favorite, but which is probably less explored in fantasy and in fiction, would be the sort of like new world religious discovery element. So I think the best place I've seen this really is in the Warhammer Fantasy series. So you've got this sort of like new world setting in Warhammer Fantasy, where you've got people from the Empire, the Empire in the Warhammer setting, who have like rudimentary gunpowder technology and stuff like that, and they're moving into, or one of the elements of the tabletop game was the new world setting, where they've got these sort of like Aztec and Mayan based like lizard cultures and things of that nature, and sort of seeing how that plays out. I think that's also really interesting and is a very fertile ground for fantasy and fiction.
Okay. What about you, Jesse? I kind of think I know what you're going to say, but I'm going to see if you surprise me.
Well, I mean, my obvious answers are the ones that I actually write, which is my family is Muskogee. Some people call that Creek. And so I love seeing the Eastern Native tribes. I grew up going to powwow and spending a lot of time with those tribes, with the dance and the drums and the stories. And I love seeing when people do that well. I write a lot of Viking stuff. I do that for a reason. I really enjoy the raiding culture. But the big one for me, the one I'm actually most in love with, I believe in cyclical history. I do believe that that's actually a thing, that we lose and gain, and not just gain when it comes to the passage of time, as far as technologies and things like that. And I love seeing a well done Atlantis. That is absolutely probably my number one. I love seeing that culture. Generally, it's fantasy because nobody really has any clue. But I love seeing people try and revive the culture and the technology and play with the descriptions Plato gave and things like that.
Okay. What about you, Melissa?
Well, mine is kind of the flip side of Ben's, which is I really like Greek mythology and the Greek gods. I like seeing those reinvented. One of my favorite series is a middle grade series called Mythomania, which is where Hades is the narrator, and he tells about how Zeus is a horrible liar, the mythomaniac of the title. And so he's like going to tell you how it really is. And there's the reinvention of these stories that are so old and yet are still being told. I mean, Lore Olympus, the graphic novel series, is a huge hit these days, and it's all about Hades and Persephone. And so I am really I am that's one of my ideas, tropes, elements that captures me every time it comes up. I get excited about retelling of Greek myth, especially in a modern setting.
Okay. Well, what about you, Jenna?
Hang on, let me click the button. Oh, yeah, no, there he is. Oh, we had two Jessies there for a minute.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, my problem is that I'm thinking about it. I'm like, oh, that one. No, wait, this one. No, wait, this one. So if I am forced to choose right now, I've been doing a bunch of stuff looking at ancient China and how that plays into the Chinese fantasy dramas and what stuff they're actually allowed to touch on that's historical or not, which is interesting because there's whole periods of time in China that is kind of verboten. You can wink at it in a fantasy, but you can't actually make a historical show out of it. there are rules about it, which I found fascinating. And so it's interesting to see how those things work together and where those expectations are, and strict rules among classes and what's expected, and just the beauty of some of the costuming and that kind of stuff is it's so very different than what we see in the US. And so I like that it's a very foreign kind of culture and an ancient culture to look at, and to say, how does that play against the stereotypes that I'm used to from the things that I read? So that's my current one, but I have a lot.
So I didn't say Norse because I was absolutely convinced Jesse would say that. But I do like seeing Vikings. Space Vikings works great as well. But I also love Egyptian. Like I have, I've seen 7 movies in the movie theater in my too many years on this planet. And one of them was Stargate with the, of course, ancient Egyptian culture. And I've been hooked ever since. And of course, you get some of that with the Indy series, the Indiana Jones stuff with the ancients. So for me, I love seeing Egyptian architecture, like the gods, the mummies, all of it in speculative fiction, and of course the Norse. But I do think we're starting to see more people go back to Egypt as a fertile well to draw on, because people are interested in it, but they abandoned it for a while. So I do think those kinds of trends, as far as what's popular, are cyclical. And so I'm happy to see more of that content coming out as far as that goes. But because we are civilized human beings here at the Blasters and Blades podcast, we are no longer knuckle dragging troglodytes. I'm going to ask you, coffee or tea, and what are you drinking with the Greek gods, Melissa?
I am always drinking Coca-Cola. I like to think that the nectar of the gods is probably Coca-Cola. So, come at me.
So you think ambrosia is hidden in a Coca-Cola can?
No, ambrosia is the food. Nectar is the drink. Mm-hmm. So nectar is but ambrosia. You think ambrosia is hidden in the Coca-Cola bottle? That's what makes it so good. I don't know. Maybe not. So yeah, I'm gonna introduce the Greek gods to Coca-Cola, and we can have a taste war to see which is better.
I have seen some interviews of the time when certain narcotics were making it big that were at one point in time in Coca-Cola, and it was referred to as ambrosia. That's just me being a little bit weird and nerdy about history things. So, of course, when do you trust the drug addict on their opinion on anything? So
that's true.
All right. What about you, Ben? What are you drinking if you're taking it back to the ancient Greeks?
I'm taking back coffee because that's still my favorite, but I'm going to take it. We're recording this right before Father's Day. My daughter is planning on making tiramisu, like with the soaked in coffee. Mm-hmm. So I'm taking coffee in its best form, which is in tiramisu.
Uh-huh. I don't think I've ever actually had tiramisu. I like coffee.
Oh, it's incredible.
It's good.
Okay.
Yeah, even if it's not really a coffee person, well-made tiramisu is quite good.
It's incredible.
Is it like a sponge cake, basically, that soaks up the liquid? Is that what it is?
Kind of, yeah.
A little bit, yeah.
Kind of. It's a layered dessert and ladyfingers, and if we get into it, we will go completely off topic, but it's a good dessert.
It's really good.
Yeah.
All right. What about you? I was going to grab that banner in a second too. Jacob, what about you? What are you taking with the Templar Knight orders?
Well, I'm going to take coffee in its worst form, which is gas station sludge, which is my preferred way to inhale it. And I feel like if they can hold up to that, then they are worthy. So it's more of a challenge than it is a massive advancement. But
all right. So what gas station makes the worst sludge coffee that would be the biggest test for everyone?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I feel like the more advanced they try to sell it, like, oh, we've got the one that grinds the beans in front of you. Trash, absolute trash. So if I was really just trying to push them over the edge, that would be it. But if it's in a oh gosh, not a thermos. If it's in like the tankard, that sits there for like 12 hours, like that's probably the one we're going with.
That's how my stepdad described Navy coffee, actually. So maybe there's some overlap between gas station coffee and Navy coffee. All right. What about you, Jesse? What are you drinking with the Norse pantheon that you mentioned?
I feel like mead must be the answer, no matter what pantheon I show up to. I make my own, and so if I was going to show up, I would have to make my own and show up there. But as far as coffee or tea is concerned, my answer has always been hot chocolate and will continue to be so.
I know it originated with the native tribes, but I think not East Coast natives. Isn't that from like Central America?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you could introduce your Creek Muscovy. I probably butchered that, so apologies. You could introduce
Close
them
enough.
to hot chocolate,
Yeah.
or they might burn you as a witch when you do. So who knows? It could go either way. All right. What about you, Jana?
Oh, you know what it is. It's always Dr. Pepper.
She had that waiting.
I have a bunch of banners waiting that go back to the ones that come up all the time. But yeah, I'm a Dr. Pepper fiend. But it's been really, really hot, and because I'm insane, I decided to put in some more raised garden beds, and so there's been a lot of hauling dirt and stuff out there. So at that point, it's just water with lots and lots of ice cubes, because I have one of those countertop little ice cube makers, and so you fill the entire glass and put water in that, and it gets cold in a hurry.
Okay. If I'm going, since I mentioned the Egyptian gods, I would probably introduce them to coffee. It'd be hard to drink it without my milk and flavors, but I could suffer through for, the betterment of mankind. Because who knows what the Egyptian empires might have accomplished if they had coffee to go with everything else. We could still be speaking, ancient Egyptian if they'd had coffee. I'm just saying. All right. And with that out of the way, I want to dive into the topic. So I'm going to say that Ben, our sponsor, and I'm going to throw that book cover image up, is going to tell us about his book, Freedom's Vow, which does cover ancient cultures.
Yes, sir. So we'll do the read from the back. Stand tall, citizens. Shield up. Spears out. Hold to the passion of courage. In the world of the three seas, two city-states stand at the brink of war. The city of Helamar faces destruction as hoplite armies prepare for battle. Within the city, Arit, knowing only the life of a slave, vows to seek freedom at any cost. She is thrown into the conflict when she and our master discover she is a shepherd, one who has the mystic talent to kindle passions in the hearts of people. Passions of rage, joy, fear, and courage all rise and fall at her will. 15 years ago, Arit's soldier friend Philon witnessed a single shepherd destroy his army and take his people captive. Seeking not to control, but to understand the ability to be behind the destruction, he joins Arit on her quest to repay a debt, venturing where not even creatures of myth dare to tread. As Arit and Philon seek answers, the city-states clash, each exploiting the talents of their own shepherds, and a greater unknown threat is growing. A power may yet rise that will lead to the destruction of all, one brought about by the war and the talent itself. An epic tale set in a Hellenistic world that is both familiar yet fantastical, in a place that may just very well be real, somewhere and somewhen.
All right. Thank you for sponsoring this episode. And with that, let's get us on the topic, which obviously we're here to talk about ancient cultures and speculative fiction. But before we talk about that, we have the tradition here where we define terms so we are all on the same page. So ancient cultures are defined as usually spanning from the earliest recorded human civilizations around 3,500 to 3,000 BCE, before Common Era, which is what replaced before Christ and after death when we realized Jesus was born around 3 AD. So the academic term you will see instead of AD and BC is ACE and BCE. With that out of the way, that's what up from there through classical antiquity. So Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, the Indus Valley, ancient China, I'm not even going to pronounce those Chinese words. Classical Greece and Rome, Mayas, Olmecs, etc. And then the defining features of what makes an ancient culture are organized city-states with government laws and social classes, advances in writing, architecture, agriculture, science, or religion, distinct myths, art, rituals, and worldviews that influenced later societies, and often studied through archaeological artifacts and surviving texts. So that's kind of a scattergun of an era that goes way, way back. Everyone cool with that as a general definition?
Yeah.
Okay. So with that, why do you think it is appealing for people? And as Jana pointed out in the pre-show, we're studying a lot. We're covering a lot of history, and we're not going to be allowed to spend a JR podcast of 8 hours talking about nerdy history stuff. So we're clearly going to revisit this on multiple occasions, and we've got one scheduled about ancient religions separate from culture, even though there is obviously some overlap. So with that out of the way, what do you think makes it an appealing topic to fit into speculative fiction?
Well, I don't know how it is for other people. I know when I was growing up reading whatever I could find, that ancient cultures appealed to me because they were still people that I could understand, but their lives were so different from ours. And I like the idea that they are in some way comprehensible to us, no matter how old and how far away they are in time. And I think that as to why it fits into speculative, there's a lot we still don't know about ancient cultures, and so there's a lot of room you can have to insert aliens or fantasy or magic or anything like that, just because we don't know. And we don't even have to say, well, this is really how it was. We can just say, wouldn't it be cool if? And so I think for me, that's what the appeal is that it's so flexible and it's so alien at the same time, recognizable.
Okay. Anyone else got thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's important that they're people. Everybody, literally everybody who is, living, even if you're living 4,000 years ago, they're all people, they're all human beings, but they have just a completely alien context. So it's kind of a way, looking into ancient cultures is almost like it's almost like going into strange new worlds. There's alien aspects to it that are so different from our context, but just like, if you go, the Star Trek proper is, Planet of Hats, where they all look like humans except they have nose bumps. Well, it's kind of like that in ancient cultures in a lot of ways. We can understand these are people, but these are people in a very strange, fascinating context. That's kind of exciting to kind of look and explore.
Mm-hmm.
All right,
Well,
so
and a lot of the earliest forms of story that we know come from those ancient cultures, and it started with the verbal stories, the oral traditions, and then became written down. And so we learn stories and we learn the structure of stories and that kind of thing from ancient stories. It's my daughter right now, she and all of her little teenage friends, and there's a lot of them, are absolutely nuts over listening to the musical of Epic the Musical, which is the story of the Odyssey, which has been watered down in some places and not watered down in a lot of other places. So that, and these teenagers are just grasping onto this and loving it because it's story, and it's story that they recognize, and a structure that they recognize, and, what is a hero about, and all those kinds of things. That's something that they recognize. And so we learn story from those ancient cultures, and then we apply it across. So it's always fun to see it there. We recognize it.
I think
I think to sort of, oh, sorry. I think to sort of steal some elements from what everybody just said. I think everybody, at least in the West, has some form of, just because of the way public education works, has some form of baseline knowledge about one ancient culture or another. Whether it's, they watched Hercules as a cartoon as a child, or they are familiar with the Roman legions because that was the historical bit of autism that they were assigned when they turned 9 or whatever. Like everyone has some sort of baseline familiarity with that, and so the ability as an author to pick and choose very familiar chunks of each of these different cultures and just insert them into your own work. As a reader, it then becomes something that you can immediately latch onto, that like, oh, hey, I know where he's getting this from. And it's not necessarily a ripoff, because you're enjoying the fact that you're recognizing something. You feel accomplished for recognizing that thing in the work. And then additionally, to sort of go to what Ben said, not only are you able to see what these people are doing from a unique lens, but you can see what they're seeing from a unique lens that we don't necessarily have today. So for example, ancient cultures obviously didn't have internet access. This is a pretty obvious thing to say, but the amount of knowledge that they had, if I am in an ancient culture, if I'm a character from this ancient culture and I'm approaching a situation that to the modern mind is very mundane. I'm walking through the woods. Well, if I'm from that ancient culture, that gives me the opportunity as an author to write that situation to where not only am I walking through the woods, but it's terrifying because reasons, because I don't know that this is just the woods. I think this is we've got this cultural baggage that may be associated with this woodland area. We've got this is an unknown land that we've literally never stepped foot in before because we are in X timeline and we just haven't been there yet. So you're sort of able to marry the fact that you've got these very familiar elements, but you've also got extremely unfamiliar elements to the actual character that you're writing, which can sort of present you with situations and opportunities as an author that you wouldn't necessarily have with a more advanced culture that is more aware of the world around them.
So for me, like obviously, if you do some research, and I did when I was doing an intro for one of the anthologies that I wrote the forward for, the first recorded science fiction, it's considered a proto-science fiction story, was recorded in the 2nd century BCE by Lucian of Samosata, and it was basically like, it was supposed to be satire from the time. The story doesn't exist, but later historians talking about the story, who read the story, even though the story itself wasn't preserved, exist. So we've considered these stories since the rise of man. And so for me, I see using these cultures as a way to show that we're not that different from them and they not that different than us. Everyone likes to think we're somehow smarter, better. We're smarter at different things because we've learned through our lives, but people are people. And so for me, incorporating the two is one, a nod to where we've come from, but it's also, it allows you to have that society that feels foreign and alien to us because it's there, but it also works because we know the society existed. So you don't have to worry about accidentally creating a culture where, well, that's never going to happen. It would fall apart. Well, clearly it happened because they existed. And so for me, it's merging a nod to our history with having a ready-built slide-in, character of a culture that's fully developed and flushed out.
Well, and I'll add on to that. Not only do you not have to worry about it falling apart because we know it worked for some time, we also know it eventually did fall apart.
So when
it changed.
Yeah, but when it does happen, when it does change, that's not a shock to anyone. They can't claim, whoa, that was a weird development. Nobody can fall back and look at you funny when you're like, yeah, eventually like the Egyptians couldn't keep the Israelites anymore. Like, no, sorry to spoil a thousands of year old story. Like that's
this Moses guy never takes on.
Yeah, there's no way. Talking to a burning bush, dude's crazy. Anyway, point being, cultures, ancient culture especially, is how you structure life. It's how you structure being human. It's how all of these people got together and decided to structure their belief, their life, how they lived, what rules they lived by. Borrowing from that from a long time ago lets you give people something that does not feel like what they're living in, but still has the proper structures. And I think that's why we see it in fiction so much.
Well, and also to be perfectly honest, sometimes borrowing and then working from that foundation is a lot easier than 100% trying to come up with crap all by yourself. Especially when you're world building. And I think it's part of why it crosses so much into speculative fiction is that our tendency for world building is huge. When I'm doing a contemporary romance, I really don't have to think that much. I go, where am I going to put this right there? And then I go to Google Earth and I can look at the maps of the actual streets that I want things to happen on. And maybe I create an extra pizza parlor or something, but I'm not completely mapping out cultures and worlds and horse people and this big world building that we tend to do in science fiction and fantasy. And so to have some of those cultures, it gives you a starting place that you can say, okay, I've got one place where I knew I wanted a horse people culture. So I studied ancient Mongolia and went, okay, how did all of that work? What kinds of foods did they eat? How would that map onto the world I'm building? And borrowed from a bunch of things and then went, and now I'm going to add my magic system on the top and think about how that changes what I stole. And then what are extra things I want to toss in there. And so we create those it makes it easier for the writer, and then it's quick clip notes for our readers who read it and go, oh, this kind of reminds me of this thing that I've heard about. So it's kind of an interesting way to give it both from the writer and to the reader.
And it,
Go ahead.
well, I was going to say, it's absolutely, for sci-fi, it's absolutely accurate. There's no problem at all with your sci-fi people having ancient inspirations. I mean, if you look at the United States, it was basically founded by a bunch of Rome larpers. There are 16 states with a Athens and 13 states with a Rome. So I think you're absolutely allowed to have a sci-fi society that is completely mad about some ancient culture, because that happens all the time.
I, in fact, got my college education in Rome, Georgia.
And I think it works the same as for like general historical fiction in any case. You can use the foundations of history to tell a story that is maybe not set in literal ancient Greece, but it can be set in some fantasy analog of ancient Greece, and you can be telling the story and make it be something that people can relate to, and not have to bring ancient, like real historical attitudes and feelings into. And that's maybe more effective when we're talking more recent history, like if you're talking about, say, the Third Reich. You want to have a story about Hitler analog, and you can tell that story, and maybe that's because you don't want to have to deal with actual Hitler. But you have this basis for the storytelling that doesn't have all the emotional baggage that real history did, but it still feels enough like real history and real ancient cultures that you can relate, that you can really get into it. So I kind of like that aspect of being able to use history as a foundation for speculative fiction.
You could go the other direction too. What if you had a Roman Empire, but they're vehemently against slavery because reasons?
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah.
What does that look like?
Take the existing history and alter it, and then there's the whole secret history, alternate history venues of, well, what if? And just like you say, you take the Roman Empire but no slavery. You take the Egyptian Empire but fix the things that made it fall apart. And I think either way, you've got something familiar that people can build on as they're reading, that doesn't necessarily have to be, well, it's real history, it's true history, because there's a place for real history, and we don't necessarily need to have it be all the time.
And for that example, we've seen one author that I know have done it both directions. So Mark Allen Idlehite wrote Steiger's Tigers, which is basically what happens if you took the lost Ninth Roman Legion and you stuck them smack dab in the middle of Middle Earth. Then he went the other direction, and what if the Roman Empire never fell? And he wrote a separate series where it's basically space Romans, literally. And so you could go either direction with it and still have fun playing with cultures and what if. And, what if the Library of Alexandria never burned? I know it's been too soon, but like there's Alexandria, excuse me. But like there's a lot of directions you could go with it on the what if question, and apply it in a way that doesn't limit you to earthly things when you apply it. Does anybody else have thoughts on this before I move? Because I do have a question sort of pivoting a little bit.
Just real quick, I think and I don't want to jump questions here, but I think the other way that you can run with that, which is also an interesting way to do it, is, the deeper that you get as an author or as a historian into the history, and the more obscure details that you find, not only can you find stuff that's extremely familiar to the reader that they're going to pick up on immediately, but you can also find stuff that's so crazy that actually happened that the reader doesn't acknowledge that it's real, and you can insert those things as well, and they come off as fairly unique or borderline even unrealistic points. But if the reader chooses to delve deeper, they might find that it was actually based on something realistic. To an extent, you see this with like Tolkien, like as time goes on, and now obviously a lot of this has already been hashed out, but for a modern reader, if you're getting into, the history of the Middle Earth, you might find out that, oh, wow, well, this one story was based on this ancient Celtic legend, and Tolkien knew this when he wrote it. And it just sort of slowly unveils over the course of decades. And so you can sort of go both directions, which is what I think it's a great cheat to be knowledgeable of history. Not that it necessarily makes your job easier as a writer, but it sort of does, because you're able to not only pull things that are familiar and recognizable to the reader, but you're also able to pull things that might, coming from my perspective, writing a boys' adventure novel with the historical fiction elements, hey, this actually happened, believe it or not. And especially in speculative fiction, you can do the exact same thing. Like, oh, wow, this sounds nuts. I'm going to look into it further. Oh, well, there's actually a real historical analog to the thing that I just read. So you can sort of go both routes, which I think makes it a very flexible tool to have in your toolbox as a writer.
And that's funny because it's one of the things, the first thing I noticed when I wrote my first military science fiction, and I got my first review from it or report from an editor, was I used stuff that had really happened when I was in Iraq as inspiration. And they're like, that's so unbelievable. That would never happen. And I'm like, I could give you the after action report. It's filed in my medical record, but sure. And so it always amazes me, like, if you put it in fantasy, people will go with it, or sci-fi. But when you do it and you're telling them it's a real story, they're suddenly, it's like, wait, what? No, that can't be. And so it's always amazing where that line is.
A more modern example of this, which obviously we're focused on ancient civilizations currently, but I just finished The Most Dangerous Man by Jack Murphy, which is sort of a rip of like The Most Dangerous Game, but it's The Most Dangerous Game versus like a U.S. Army Ranger, like an RRC guy. And he's got stuff straight in there from like, oh, well, we've got a royal family going on paid hunts so they can kill humans. And it's like, oh, well, this actually happened in Sarajevo in the 90s. You know what I mean? Like this is a real thing. But some of the reviews were like, oh, this is totally unrealistic. This is crazy. Like it threw me out of the story. And it's like, well, this actually happened, so you've kind of got you've got the ability to do that as a writer. If you're familiar with the sort of original source material, you can manipulate it a lot of different ways.
Yeah. All right. So one of the things that I think is interesting, in addition to you have the allure of the known, you can also play with the unknown. There are some unknowns. And, if you'd asked me 3 years ago, I would have said, for example, what happened to the lost Roanoke colony? Yeah, they ruined it and found them. Because there's those mysteries, right? And so like one example is the late Bronze Age collapse, 12,000 BCE-ish. Don't quote me on that one, but it's the sea peoples that came and were raiding the heck out of everyone. We don't know who they are, where they came from. We've got guesses, but any guess you've got, and I've got 10 people that will argue with you academically and tell you why that's the dumbest thing they've ever heard, and it's this people instead. And so those mysteries there's stories in the unknown as well, because you're shining lights on the dark corners of history that nobody knows about, and using that for story fodder in a speculative fiction setting. So have you guys seen that either as readers or as creatives yourself, using some of the mysteries of antiquity?
Well, I mentioned, like, I do Atlantis. I have, if anybody's ever seen my, mascot lady, that's Vera. Vera is an exiled Atlantean princess. That's literally where she comes from. I pulled her straight out of this version of Atlantis that had, instead of being sunk by the meteorite that hit the ocean like something like 12,000 years ago or whatever, it basically gave them beachfront property. And I worked from there. So I actually do that personally. I've actually really loved seeing that when people pull things like you mentioned, the seafaring peoples, the Phoenicians, working with people that are nomadic like that. I think it's a lot of fun when you have that wiggle room, because now nobody can tell you you're wrong. And the people that do try to tell you you're wrong are just kind of goofy. There's a lot of people that happens with Viking culture, because a lot of Viking culture isn't recorded. And so people will be like, there was one that came out that was like, Vikings didn't really wear furs because we didn't find any in the burial. Well, one, it's fur. You think it's going to hang around forever? And two, just because I didn't get buried in my winter coat doesn't mean I didn't own one. Like, what's wrong with you? Anyway, so that's it's you can have a lot of fun, have a lot of wiggle room, but still get that mix we've been talking about, that feeling of something being real when you do that.
Yeah, that's one of the things about history is we often misinterpret what those grave goods actually mean. Like there's some cases where I've seen pop culture be like, oh, she was buried with a spear. Clearly women were in charge here and she was a warrior princess. And I'm like, or she was married to the chief, which we know because we, translated what was actually written instead of just went with one spearhead in her burial tomb. And so but that of course, if you can take that and apply that to story, intentionally doing that can lead to some interesting stories. What if? And you can kind of twist things and give you a starting point, like Janice said earlier, with the world building already done, and now you can just toy with concepts.
Yeah, the Kate Daniel series by Alana Andrews does a great job of that, because they pull on a whole lot of Mesopotamian culture and history and what we know and what we don't know. And there's a whole lot from that area that we just flat don't know. And there's a lot of the stories are just strange enough that putting magic on top of that works really, really well. And so this is urban fantasy, and it casts back and it says, yes, at that time, magic was very, very active in the world. And then eventually the pendulum of technology showed up and it crashed the magic. And where they are in their urban fantasy, the magic has come back. And so you have these things from different ancient cultures showing up, and her particular focus is on that ancient Mesopotamia because that's where her father came from, and everything is bad because of it. And her father is a great wizard. And then again, they tie things and they use terms that are from the Bible, but things that we don't have a lot of information on. So they're filling in some of those gaps and going, well, what did happen to those water gardens? And what did happen to this, that, and the other? And then pulling that into the story. And you see that a lot of urban fantasy pulls on some of those ancient cultures because there's often reintroduction of magic or of a side-by-side world, the discovery of that side-by-side world. And a lot of that can be explained through some of the stories that we get that are older, because there's a lot of magic, there's a lot of mystery there. And so you can fill in those areas in order to bring them into the modern day.
Yeah, and you can also assign source material. So like Stargate did this. Where would the ancient Egyptian culture comes from? Well, the aliens brought it, and then they turned it into so they were gods. Or
Egypt gets that a lot.
Yeah, and they built something really cool, and then everyone's convinced aliens did it instead of their actual engineers. I imagine they're rolling over in their mummified tombs. Like, no, I built this. What other ways do you think it is used? Do you think with the culture, do you like it when it's more overt? Like clearly there are space Romans and they are, fantasy fantasy Romans, or do you like it when it's more a set dressing applied to something else? Like, do you have a preference?
Why either or? Why not both? I mean, just
but why do you have a preference?
You're asking, do we like it? And it's like, I like both. I like the ones where we clearly see, like there's a not web comic, but it's a web thing that I read, and it's what happens if you take all of the Greek gods, move them to modern day, and you shove them on a hotel with each other. And so watching that whole thing and reading it is hysterical because all of the stories about the Greek gods. So where Hades and Persephone are being really clueless about dating each other, it's very, 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 very funny. But then I also like that, I took the Library of Alexandria and I couldn't get over the burning. And so I shoved it into a pocket dimension, and it still exists. And I have an urban fantasy librarian who takes care of it. And they have to sort through all of these spam messages that they get because the library wants all the data. So the one is, it's fun both directions.
Well, the reason I asked to answer your question that started that was because if we didn't, we don't have a podcast. Obviously, the whole point is to talk about it.
But I mean, the answer can be, because you asked what we liked, it can be.
Well, he asked if we had a preference. He asked if we had a preference.
No, I don't have a preference. I like them all.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't. I kind of lean toward real history with magic in it, as opposed to. I mean, aside from my love of translating the Greek gods into modern world, but what I was just thinking is that it's not enough to just make it historically accurate. I was reading a mystery series set in ancient Egypt, set in the time of Hatshepsut, and it was beautifully researched. I mean, really incredible detail. It felt really accurate. I don't know a ton about that period, but he made it seem very real, and it was incredibly dull. It was so boring because there wasn't really anything to bring it alive. And granted, we're talking a mystery that is not speculative fiction, but I think the lesson is that just because it's historically accurate doesn't mean it's going to capture a reader's attention. That you want the historical accuracy, but not really at the if the story doesn't fit that, if the story doesn't live up to it, then there's really no point. There, you've done all that research for nothing.
I think that kind of what I was going to say before you even mentioned that is that I feel like it can be easier to miss the mark as an author if you're going for the direct translation. Here is Rome, here's Greece, whatever. I think it's a little easier to throw the reader out of the story if you do it wrong that direction. I think my preference generally, just as a reader, is seeing an author take elements from those cultures and inserting them sort of like under the hood to where you don't really know they're there until you know they're there, because at that point it's not an element that's necessarily jerking you out of the plot line. But I have also seen where authors do that really well. One example, now this is not speculative fiction, but Adrian Goldsworthy is an author that does historical fiction. The two big periods that he covers are the Roman Empire, and then the other one is like the Crimean Wars with the UK, with Britain. And he's actually he's like a Roman history professor. That's his specialty. He's written nonfiction on it, and specifically his Roman historical fiction books focus on Britain in the sort of like Roman colonial era. So like Hadrian's Wall, the main character for his series starts with a book called Vindolanda, and essentially the opening sequence for this is there's a Roman centurion. Well, he's not Roman. He's from like an extinct essentially tribe, an extinct Briton tribe, and he is a centurion out in sort of the hinterlands in Britain. And he's on patrol, and he finds a shoe and evidence of some sort of ambush. And he sort of follows this trail and ends up finding a Roman noblewoman who had been ambushed on her way to a party. Well, you get to the afterwards, like this kicks off the book, you go through this whole thing. You get to the afterwards, and he's like, well, the reason I wrote about this is because at this actual place, Vindolanda, that we have mapped out as, archaeologists and historians, we found one shoe, but we didn't find the matching one. And it traced back to, this would have been a woman's party shoe. And we found a letter in correspondence where this random noblewoman was invited to a party on this date. And so he just sort of filled in the gaps. And he was able to do that to write a historical fiction novel that was extremely engaging and really well done from the blank space that existed within the actual history. And so I think it's something that you can really do well as an author, but you can also, it's very easy to mess it up and sort of jerk the reader out of that. If it's like, I recognize this element and it's really obvious, but the way that it was used here just doesn't jive with my understanding of how I think this should be there. I think you can have a lot of preconceived notions as a reader, especially if you're sort of historically inclined, that can make that more difficult to write, but it can be very enjoyable to read. So for my preference, I think for most authors, I sort of prefer to see just the sort of elements secretly inserted, and then you're able to sort of discover them as the investigator, as the reader, versus seeing it sort of copy pasted. But it can be done very well. It's just very just to sort of beat a dead horse, it's sort of easy to fall off the horse if you're writing that way. So it's sort of precarious territory.
And I can give you a couple good examples, or at least one author that really does the we are here really well. Stephen Pressfield. Stephen Pressfield did A Man-at-Arms and Gates of Fire. And both of them are absolutely killer. No, I am not making this up. We are here. Gates of Fire was the Spartans, and it's basically a novelized version of what happens with the stand at the Hot Gates. Fantastic novel. A man-at-arms is in Rome during the time of the, like, I guess Christian Revolution is the best way to put it. I mean, basically during the time of Christ. And it's all about a mercenary who gets kind of involved in what's happening with everything going on. They're both absolutely fantastic. They capture kind of like the Northmen did. I don't know if anybody saw that movie, but it does a wonderful job of capturing the feel of like magic and spiritualism without actually presenting you anything that has to be magic or spiritualism. This could all be in this dude's head. It could be, he sees the gods because that's his religion and that's what he believes. But nothing that happens is outside of human possibility. And he just absolutely nails that. So I feel like with spec fic, we write about the exceptional and we talk about the exceptional. So when it's done right, I like that version a lot better. It impresses me more. It's easier to do the other one. I do the other one. I take all these little bits of culture and slap them all together and give you something new. But it's actually harder and more impressive when someone gives you something you already know about and tells you a new story.
I mean, that's the good thing about ancient cultures. If you want to go in a spec fic direction, like speculative fiction, you can have historical spec fiction that is set in ancient Earth time. It's so far back, we don't know a lot of details. Maybe magic did work back then. Maybe, all these stories and myths are real, or there's real element, it's all things. One of my very favorite growing up authors was G.A. Henty. He had a bunch of boys' books where it was, a boy does something in historical. That's a great setup. Somebody should
I've read those.
Yeah, somebody should do one of those for the Boxer Rebellion. I think that'd be a
Yeah,
great book.
I'd be really into that. Yeah.
I think that'd be a great book. But
I mean, I'd read it.
I think
Yeah.
I saw one of those. I might have picked a copy up for little dude.
yeah. But I think, but for ancient, again, you can be more wild for ancient stuff. You can go, if it's that far back, we don't really know what it was like 4,000 years ago in the island of Crete. We don't actually know. Maybe there was a half bull, half man trapped beneath a labyrinth there. Like, go nuts, by all means. Have fun with that as a spec fiction.
Yeah, I think you can get far enough back that we're toe to toe with the legends that existed at the time, and then you've got a huge canvas that you can paint on. So yeah, I think it's definitely it's very fertile ground if the author is willing to do the diligence, to get the story there.
Well, and if you're a lover of mystery and story, history and ancient cultures, they hold all those things for you. Like I almost feel like we're kind of preaching to the choir on this, because the overlap of, at least in my opinion, the Venn diagram of people that enjoy history and people that enjoy speculative fiction should be a circle. But yeah, if you go back to corded ware culture, or like if you look at the modern studies on what we've discovered from before the Bronze Age, especially like Bronze Age or Stone Age Europe, where cultures are just budding during that time, it gets wild. There's a whole battle at a river, like around like where Denmark is now, that they just found like thousands of weapons and bones in the river, and nobody has any idea what happened at all. And so all you know is that for some reason, two armies in an age that dudes were barely able to work metal decided to square up at this river. And the river carried their remains and weapons all down through, because of the current. And they're still fishing random stuff out. The Earthburt sword is a great example of that. Like, we just pulled a really great looking sword out of the water, and where did it come from, who made it, what century is it from, is all a mystery. So I think that if you love those things, you should probably, if you love one, you should check the other out.
And we've also found from the corded ware culture, talking about militaries, mass graves in Germany and Poland. And they call the battle you're discussing, they call it the Battle of the Axe. It's how historians are referring to it in documentaries. If you want to check it out, there's a YouTube channel, and I'll see if I can find it and throw it in the show notes that breaks down some of these ancient cultures and tells the stories as we understand them. Because it's fascinating if you love this stuff, and then you can kind of set your story in it. Because if you've got ancient cultures, generally speaking, you've got shaman. But what if shaman could really do magic? You got a fantasy story right there.
Yeah.
Instead of just healing stuff with herbs or whatever. So is there anything you think from ancient cultures that are off limits that we probably shouldn't touch in the form of story?
I'm not going to say shouldn't.
Yeah.
But I'm saying I don't personally like getting into the sheer level of just unmitigated brutality that you often get in a lot of ancient cultures. I mean, I respect the history. If somebody wants to go there, I get it. And it's important to know, but the level of just glee for carnage, especially, so I personally, like Karen and I, will not write the sexual violence that is just incredibly common in every part of ancient cultures. That's just not something we enjoy writing for books that are fun. Although it's there. It's very it's a legitimately true fact, and so you can definitely do that. But that's just kind of where I don't enjoy reading that. I don't enjoy writing that myself. But that's just not where we're going to go.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I just watched Apocalypto for the first time. Great movie, but and now granted that movie has its own criticisms from historians, but I agree with Ben. I think at a certain point, even if we just assume that this was a diligent effort at historical realism, at a certain point it gets gratuitous, and it's like it's not necessarily enjoyable to the reader. It can even if it is extremely realistic, it can get to a point where it's like, all right, we probably don't need to resack Constantinople. We probably don't need to actually go through. Now, I mean, there's a place for that, especially for writing an actual historically based novel. But for spec fic, I think you can quickly get to a point where it becomes gratuitous, especially when you talk about some of the sexual violence that was at play. This was all real stuff that happened every day, and it's really I'm not trying to write modern smut fantasy, So it's like it's definitely something that you can go too far on, even if you're trying to just adhere to what actually happened. Just because, again, a lot of this was extremely, extremely brutal history, and the modern morals that we may adhere to, even in warrior professions, are leagues ahead of what existed in the past and what, in some cases, exists in other parts of the world right now. So I think you have to be careful with that. There's certainly a place for it, especially if I'm not a message fiction guy, but if that's the route you're sort of taking, you could do that. But I think, especially in spec fic, you just have to sort of be careful with it and administer it in an appropriate dosage if you're going to use it at all.
Yeah, I agree. I think in terms of what's taboo, I don't think anything should be taboo when we're writing about historical. I mean, that's where we start to rewrite our own history and say, well, this didn't really happen. And I think that kind of denial is counter to what we're going for with writing about ancient cultures. But yeah, I think at some point we can just take it as given that, yes, they were brutal. Yes, there was a lot of sexual violence. Don't necessarily need to see it written out.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, I mean, again, you want to write it, sure, fine, do that. But I don't think readers need that, and I don't think it adds to the realism to be graphic about those details. I mean, you can certainly, you don't have to pretend it didn't happen. I mean, you can mention, oh, and this was going on, and this was going on, but you don't have to put it on the page to that extent to make it suddenly realistic.
I think for me, it's not so much that you shouldn't cover it, but you definitely don't want to glorify the bad. I think we've romanticized the Romans, for instance. But if you read anybody who writes Romans, they need to multiply the level of viciousness by like a factor of 1,000 because they were pretty brutal. Like the concept decimate comes from the Roman legion practice where if a unit messed up, like 1 in 10 would be killed.
Yeah.
So we use it differently as a word, but like that was nothing to them. That was just Tuesday. So go ahead.
Well, I was going to say more than that. I love gladiators. Like I'm piggybacking off your Rome thing. I love gladiators. The idea of the gladiators themselves, like these superstar rock star dudes that do nothing but train in the ludus and have these magnificent displays of martial prowess out on the stand, and they fight tigers and each other, and sometimes it's to the death, and sometimes it's the first blood, and like I love that. Everything around the real gladiatorial circus is disgusting on a level that most people are not like. You want to know how like I can tell you the magic of making the Minotaur maybe only worked once or didn't work anymore? It's because the Romans tried to do it almost every gladiatorial games live in front of an audience. Yeah, there's so much terrible thing that like it wasn't just the fights. There's the chariot racing, but there's all kinds of executions and just straight torture for the crowd. Bread and circuses means a lot more than a clown from its original intention. And so I feel like you can acknowledge those things and not get wrapped up in them, but it is important to know them because it cuts through that romanticism.
Yeah.
And it's focusing on the kinds of stories that we want to tell and that, audiences want to read. And you do have audiences of various sizes that may want more of that graphic content. And a lot of them don't. A lot of them are coming to speculative fiction for escapism. And we want to escape some of the grind of every day, but still have it in a way that's fascinating, that again pulls on a little bit of those romanticized cultures. We want to have Thor be buff with his flowing curls and funny and all of those things, even if the actual myths are grittier than that. And so I think that we've kind of hit on that. And I think the other thing is that phrase of having respect for the source material. And so it is, you can tell when an author's done their homework and they kind of know what's going on and how it is that they're playing with it. You sometimes need to be a little bit careful when a lot of those cultures still have descendants that are around today. I write an urban fantasy series that has a woman who has Lakota background. And when I was pulling different stories and myths and stuff from that to use, I wrote to the Lakota Nation that they have a webpage and a place where you can send emails and ask questions. And so I asked what was appropriate and what wasn't. And they kind of gave me some guidelines for, hey, we're just happy that anybody's writing about this. So they weren't upset at all, but they did kind of say, yeah, there are certain things to steer clear of and that kind of thing because of the way that we look at story. It's very important to them. And there are certain stories that you only tell at certain times and only certain people should tell them. And so it was knowing that about the culture to make sure that I did not step in it in a way that was going to be insulting to people who are descendants of that culture. So it's, respecting your material enough to make sure you've done enough research that you're not going to do something that is going to get you called out in ways you don't want to be.
Yeah. And I think the risk that you run is at a certain point, you hit a level of aversion in the average reader that they're just going to shut it off. And it's going to be, something that they actively not only avoid, but preach against. And so I think one example is like, I love the Game of Thrones, like Song of Ice and Fire. I'm a big fan, whether it is ever finished or not. I know George Martin is a very relatively controversial author in some ways, but I think that shows that that's the balancing point. We've got the sort of War of the Roses background. We've got some of the very realistic, gritty. I think the point in that series that sort of drives people over the edge is the fact that it is very close to, whether we want to admit it or not, to what was actually sort of happening in some of these environments, which is what drives people away from it. And I think the reason that we can see that that's sort of the point, like that's the tip of the knife's edge, is that it is so popular but you also have such an outspoken opposition to him as an author and some of the stuff that he's written. So I think at a certain point you have to be very careful in not getting to the point that not only are you glorifying it necessarily, but some people are just going to be totally turned off as soon as they hit that point where they see that or read it, whether it was realistic or not, whether it was accurate historically or not. If they don't want to read it, they're not going to read it, and they're going to tell their friends about it. And so, from even just a marketing perspective, you have to be careful. I think the worst examples that we see in this are when it almost feels as if it's like it's almost for the gratification of the author if it's poorly done, and that can be very, you're in strange land at that point. And you're not really going to get the reader base that you want to get from that. So yeah, I think it's definitely something that it's a balancing act. You want the material to be realistic, you want the characters to have depth, but at the same time you can't have the characters have so much realism and depth that people don't want to enjoy it on their time off in 2026 when we've got 10,000 other things that could take our attention.
Yeah, and that's one of those things you got to balance. It's, as an author, one of the things we're always balancing against, and so this is something you'll see as a creative on the other end, as a consumer on the other end of it, dear listener, is it's a balance of what do I write that's factually correct, and do I write what the audience believes is factually correct? And Jacob and I have had this discussion before about like the military, for instance. I can write the way things really were, and you might tell me it's unbelievable or it's not real because you've seen so much of the Hollywood version, you believe that. So I'll give you as an example. Everyone's convinced we call Sergeant Sarge. Anyone would have called me that, I would have chopped their throat off. Like, that's just not something we did. But they see it on the Hollywood World War II movies, etc. And so people believe they do. And so when you don't address that in fiction, they're like, oh, that's not real, even though you're being correct. It comes up with grammar too. Like, do you write what's grammatically correct or what the audience will think? I don't have that problem. I have editors for a reason, so I don't have to think about that. But some authors, like Jana, do. They consider the grammar. And so it's a balancing act. It's a balancing act, right? With what they think about history and then what really happened that you have to consider as well, which is an interesting theory. Specifically, when you mentioned those people that are still around, the Romans were really, really good in their post-Christianity era of wiping out all that remained of many, many pagan cultures and their religious peoples and the people that knew the knowledge. So they essentially razed the ground and salted the earth of everybody that knew about that religion. You'll have people now, I don't know, I want to call them neo-LARPers because that's kind of condescending, but there are people that believe they practice those ancient religions and they're absolutely convinced they're right because they're guessing. Because the Romans did such a good job of wiping it out. So on the one hand, you want to cover ancient Egyptian, I with the story I wrote with James Ward, I actually had people reach out the first time we talked about it, oh, I practice that religion. And I'm like, do you really? And of course you got to be respectful of everyone, but there's a line where too respectful prevents any creativity. Mm-hmm. And that's part of the fun, right? Is telling those stories. But we are.
Sorry. Yeah. I mean, to that point, JR, even the modern military, if I wrote a modern story about modern soldiers talking the way that they talk and thinking about the things that they think about when they're in a combat environment or whatever, it's going to come off as, if I just do not put a filter on that, it's going to come off as not only absurd, but it's going to come off as something
excessive.
That can be very off-putting to a reader that is not familiar to how that environment works. I mean, you're talking about, and I mean, this is modern army using guns from distances where you are not seeing the death like you would in the ancient world where you are literally hacking people apart. These are not pleasant things to talk about on the best days. And so if you are not willing to put even any filter on that at all, you're just going to have to be aware that your audience is going to slim down, because some people are going to see that as not only off-putting, but they're going to view it as disrespectful, because in the US we've had this sort of pro-military, maybe not so much as of late, but this sort of pro-military ideology. And so it can be very difficult to find that balance where you are writing something that's realistic, but without, you kind of have to put the brakes on it a little bit, because I mean, ultimately we're talking about killers here. This is the profession, right? And this is especially the profession when we go back to a historical theme where, again, they're hacking each other apart with swords or thrusting spears into each other from 3 feet away. So you can definitely get into some, not to say get into trouble, but you can definitely very quickly find ground where the reader is no longer interested in this, not only because they see it as unrealistic, but because, again, it goes back to that, they've got a natural preconceived aversion to this because, of course, they do. This is what we want people to have, an aversion to this. It's not a natural thing to read about or write about to start with. And so you just, it is a balancing act, to beat a dead horse. Like you've got to be careful about uh, how you do it, how you implement it. There's a way that you can do it really well, but it's also very easy to slip into a fact where it's just overly gratuitous, right?
And
Well,
it's go ahead.
we have, and to go beyond the violence, to tackle something so much simpler, language. The Tiffany problem is real, and it's real across a ton of subjects, and it even falls over into real life. I can show you thousands of hours of footage of firefights, and the F word is a period. That is real. That's how real soldiers talk in the real moment. If I write a gunfight, which y'all know I love to do, and I put the language that was used by my brother in 2010 in Afghanistan, even people that were in the military will look at me like something's wrong with me. There's just an aversion to it on the page that occurs. That's part of the art. That's part of the art. And I've been told more than once when I put an F-bomb in a medieval or a fantasy story that, like, oh, that's such a modern word. Dude, that's a 12th century word. What is wrong with you? But people don't know that. They see it. They see the these and thous in these, copying Shakespeare with everything, and dudes in British accents, doing Rome, and think that this is reality. So you have to absolutely balance those expectations, or you're going to lose all but the most hardcore of your audience.
So one thing people don't realize when it comes to history is how much history is edited. And they say history is written by the winners. That's just a cop-out. What really happens is history is edited by the family. So, for instance, Ben Franklin, when he was alive, kept journals of his daily stuff. When he passed away, because books were worth money back then, to the point where, like, you could lend him a couple shillings. No one's going to track you down when he dies. He lends you a book. You best believe they're coming to get that back as part of his estate. I say that to say, when they had pages that he wrote things that didn't fit the image they wanted, those pages were removed from the diary. So there are whole chunks where it jumps in time. And this isn't just Franklin. I'm using him as an example because I know I've looked at where the pages were torn. But a lot of historical figures, their family and posterity edited it because they were very aware someone would read it someday. And so you get a sanitized version anyway. And they might not have used the F word. They might have said something else, but the effect of it being a curse word is going to be the same. Because there are certain things that make a word a curse word. Generally, you're talking about body functions, reproductive functions, or insults to a deity. And that's what makes a curse word in language. And they've existed before the F word. We've cussed since we started talking. So with that, I do feel like if we keep going, I'm going to end up with another hour, and Janet's going to shoot me and then get my mom to shoot me, and it'll be a bad day for me overall.
I told you it's a multi-part podcast.
I will say I think we're going to have to come back to ancient cultures with a little bit more targeted. When we do these episodes, the first one's always shotgun scatter shot, and then we'll narrow it down more directly for follow-on episodes. If you have ideas for those targeted episodes, dear listener, be sure to comment in the comment section or email any one of us, and we can make that happen. I just looked it up. The channel that covers a lot of ancient history is an author. His name is Dan Davis, and the channel is called Dan Davis History. I will link to him in the show notes and go from there. And with that, Ben, what are you reading? And then how can we find you?
Okay, so I am right now, funny you should say that, I'm actually right now reading Anabasis by Xenophon. So the lost mercenary company who got abandoned in the middle of Persia. You can find me. We're going to be doing next month on the Carbines and Cantrips book club. We're going to be doing. Jesse's on that as well. We're going to actually be doing that book, kind of like reading through it and reviewing it. So that's what I'm doing right now. And you can find me. Our website is bkgibson.com. You can see BK Gibson Writes at Twitter. And yeah, we're on all the other socials there too.
Okay. What about you, Jacob?
So as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, I just finished The Most Dangerous Man by Jack Murphy. Recommend it. It was really good. If you're in for like I mean, I read it in a day. I hate to say that I didn't put it down because I did, but it's one of those books where you could crush through. Really enjoyable and sort of touched on some of the things, like it's one of those things where he's got elements in there where you're reading it and it almost throws you out of the story, but then you realize that like some of these things actually happen and it's not that crazy. He's got some like tech bros in there trying to get their next thrill and some different elements like that. So that was really good. I'm currently reading the first Dune book for the first time. I've put it off for too long. I'm really enjoying it so far. As far as where you can find me, I've got an Amazon author page, Jacob Sharp. Obviously the E4 Tales of the E4 Mafia 2. I'm linked on there. A Boy Against the Boxers. And then as far as social media, I'm on all most of it. I don't use all of it. Where I'm most frequently at is Facebook under Jacob Sharp Writes.
Okay. You're pointing into the stick, as they say. Jesse, what are you reading and how can we stalk you? I mean, follow you.
I am reading Freedom's Vow by BK Gibson. I'm also bouncing back and forth between that and I'm in my Kindle. Larry Correa just put out several. He just put out New Academy of Outcast and American Paladin, and I'm really digging American Paladin. Does actually use some cool ancient culture stuff. There's some Aztec Mayan stuff that's worked in, really cool. And Freedom's Vow, of course, is Hellenistic. Really enjoying that one so far. For finding me and my work, outlawauthor.com. That makes it nice and simple. All of my socials, except for my TikTok, are listed there. I got to update it with my TikTok. You will find me under my name on every social. Jesse James Fain, Jesse James Books, some version of that. I guarantee you, if you look for me, you're going to find me. There's not a lot of Fains out there, and there's definitely not a lot of Jesse James Fains out there. X and Substack are my most active. You can find me on Facebook. It's my personal page. I tell this almost every episode. That's an unfiltered Jesse. That is a personal Jesse. That's not work author Jesse. That's tattoos, guns, and lots of cursing Jesse. If you do not like those things, do not show up. If you do like those things, come say hi.
All right. Melissa, what are you reading and how can we stalk you on the Wild Wild Interweb?
Well, sadly, I am reading my own books. I am working my way through the Crown of Tremontaine series, reading aloud to my daughters. My second daughter is dyslexic and she loves story, but reading is not comfortable. So she doesn't enjoy reading on the page. So she listens to audiobooks. There are no audiobooks for the Crown of Tremontaine. So I'm doing the reading. And we are almost at the end of that series. Just finished reading the book about the horse nomads, the Irish horse nomads. And you can find me at my website, melissamcshanewrites.com. And my storefront is nightharborpress.com, where you can get audiobooks, ebooks, and print signed books. My website has a newsletter link. You can sign up for my newsletter, which is published monthly. Right now, I am in the middle of getting ready to move back to the United States from India. So I'm not really active on my social media, but I am on X as M. McShane Writes, and I have a Facebook page, and you're welcome to search for me there.
When we recently did where you sponsored an episode because Jana had her I Want My Basement Back campaign. So that was one of the things we did. So we listened to your books on your Night Harbor Press. That's one of our
cool.
And it wasn't because we like you, although we do. It was because Jana wanted her basement back. So
Jana does want her basement back.
Telling them all was the way to go.
She's getting her basement back in a couple of weeks. So
Does this mean we get to see the library for real?
Yes, we do. It'll be the real library and not the picture behind me.
All right. Jana, what are you reading at the moment?
At the moment, I am at the very, very end of Ghost of a Chance. That is the second book in the Arcane Case Files by Dan Willis. It's a really, really good series. I just don't have enough time to just sit and read for fun, and so I'm moving through it slowly, but I really, really enjoy it. And other than that, it's piles of editing stuff. I've got an anthology coming out next week called Sand and Storm, which has been fun for this particular podcast because when you ask for people to tell you tales of creatures of the desert, you get a whole lot of Egyptian mythology crossover. And so we
Guilty.
got all sorts of, yes, you are guilty. JR and I have a story in that one. But there were really fun things that people reached into to go, what are tales of the desert? And a lot of them were ancient cultures. So I've been doing all of the last of the proofing on that, which is a lot of reading, but it's a different kind of reading when you're doing that kind of edits. So, but all good stuff. And you can find me at linktree, linktr.ee/Opal Kingdom Press, or if you search for either of these two pen names and it has to do with publishing, it is almost me almost all of the time. And that should cover it. You can find me. I'm the loser at Internet Hide and Go Seek, much to my son, the security officer's chagrin.
And we should definitely do an episode about the new anthology when it comes out, interview some of the authors, because that's one of those things where you learn through writing. Not everything's a hit the first time. That's why we have editing. And so sometimes, for instance, if you're not super educated on religion and you try to merge two that don't exactly line up, you can end up where you break the story. And that's what happened with Jen and I. She had to edit that out because, trying to merge the two cultures because it sounded cool suddenly breaks it for people that actually believe certain things.
It didn't work quite as well, so it was interesting.
Well, that's what, like I said, that's what editing's for, but that's part of what we were talking about in practice is, right? Like you try to incorporate things and sometimes you got to tweak it because if you did it for real, like that doesn't exactly work out. All right. And you can find, well, hold on. This is the part where I have to remind you I'm contractually obligated to please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right book, so do your part. And if his ad read today inspired you when BK Gibson read about Freedom's Vow, if he inspired you to go read the book, leave a review for him too. Tell him we sent you. And with that, you can find us on our Linktree, linktr.ee, Linktree/Blasters and Blades Podcast. Again, Linktree/Blasters and Blades Podcast, where we link to all the things: the BitChute, the Rumble, the YouTube, the TikTok, the Twitters. We've got our Spotify, our Discord, our Substack, our Blasters and Blades Facebook group and Facebook page. You can email us at blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. For professional purposes only, people save the shenanigans from Stabby Stab over there on the Instagram, Twitter, and the email. You can support the show by going to buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. These episodes aren't free to produce, and we greatly appreciate your patronage. And with that, I would like to thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For my crazy co-host, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades Podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, and we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. And with that, we're going to hit the end button. Wait for it. Don't cuss yet, Jesse. Wait